There's what we say, and then there's what we don't. And often it's the unspoken that holds the most power. Welcome to the Unspoken Edge, a space where hidden dynamics, quiet tensions, and unacknowledged truths are named, held, and turned into grounded action. I'm Rachel Keck, coach, facilitator, and founder of Mosaic Collaborative. I work with visionary leaders who want growth that's sustainable, relational, and real. Here, we explore what's beneath the surface, the energy under leadership, the patterns, resistance, and the truth shaping how we lead and live. In every episode, we'll name what's missing, hold what's tense, and follow the thread to what's real. Because clarity creates traction, and legacy, it's not just what you leave behind, it's how you lead today. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. Today on the podcast, we have Mary Messner, who I met Mary a few years ago. She was fresh out of corporate and wondering what is next? Where am I going? I feel like you've gone from corporate to creativity. You're like shiny, happy people. You are just so magnetic and so big. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today because I feel like we haven't really visited much in the last couple of years. So I'll hand it to you. What do you want people to know about you and what you do?
Okay, well, first, that was like the nicest introduction. So thank you. I will take big, shiny, happy, all those adjectives all day long. So thank you for that. Yeah, the quick, rundown for me is I'm a keynote speaker and I speak about creativity. And you and I can certainly kind of dig through what that means, but that's the short and sweet for me. I speak to all types of audiences, more women than men. And there's a little bit of intentionality behind that, which we can dig into as well. But ultimately, I love the opportunity to get this idea of creativity out into the world and just get as many people thinking about their path and their decisions and their activities and their business. And this is a personal conversation and a work conversation, but thinking about how creativity can impact all those different avenues.
Yeah. And you just had a TED Talk around
I
this,
did it. Yes, I did a
which
TEDx.
is a humongous deal. Yes.
It was the wildest experience. So it's funny because, it comes out, it's 10 minutes long, which is intentionally I wanted to keep it really short. And that's just the reality of the attention span of our world today. And I wanted it to be short, I wanted it to be actionable, I wanted it to be relatable. So the whole thing is centered around this one phrase, help me think through this. It's meant to be a little playful and silly. And my hope is that everyone can kind of see themselves in the message. But yeah, it's like 8 months of constant work on this one 10-minute thing. And now it's out there for the world, which that in and of itself is a really strange, strange feeling.
It's so vulnerable, isn't it? I mean, that's the word that comes to mind for me is like you work on this and then you put this work out into the world, and that's quite vulnerable.
Well, and I think then everybody gets to form opinions, and that's everyone's right to do and to say, was that good? Was that not? And I still, I watch it. I've watched it a lot. I did learn that I can watch it on repeat, and I don't think it impacts the number of views on YouTube. You can't trick the algorithm, even though I wish that I could. Supposedly numbers matter. I don't know what for. I don't know how any of it works, except that views are good. It's not just vulnerable about what other people are thinking. It's a vulnerable process yourself because you're critiquing yourself in a different way, and you're seeing what you sound like and look like. And I heard someone once say that you will look back on this moment of your TEDx 10 years from now. This was actually my TEDx coach that said it. She said, you're going to look back in 10 years and say, I have grown so much since that moment, that what I said there and the way I said it, I'm such a different person. And that's actually given me a lot of comfort to be able to say it's this drop in time. And yes, it's on YouTube and it'll live on in perpetuity, but it still just represents this one little moment of Mary Messner in the fall of 2025, what she was working on, how she was presenting herself. And that's kind of cool to be able to say it's this little microcosm of so much more. So I guess maybe I take some comfort in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I've just this year, my best friend is very organized and very intentional, which I am so fortunate to have a best friend like that. And because of that, this year we have done monthly, we did we did monthly prep for the year before we came into it, and then we've been meeting monthly. And it's around personal growth and things like that. And because of that, I have this documentation of the year that I would not have had. And so I think, when we do put out, I think about that for the book that I published, like, gosh, that it was great. And also, 6 months down the road, I would have changed probably some of the stories or I mean, it is so dynamic. Things are moving so fast. We're moving so fast.
Yeah. But I think it's so important for conversations like this to be able to say that, to say, just because you put
Mhm.
something else out into the world for everyone to consume doesn't mean that that's a moment in time that defines you. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to change your opinion or your approach or your thoughts, because that's who we are as human beings. We're constantly changing, and the outside world more than anything is changing. I was laying in bed awake a couple nights ago, and I was thinking about my two daughters. They're 9 and 11, and thinking
Mhm.
about both of them have these plans for what they want to do in the future, and they've named their careers, and it still kind of changes a little bit every so often, but one is interested in graphic design and marketing. The other one, who is my systems girl, wants to go work on an assembly line and just put things together and move things from point A to B to C and have this end result. So they both have very unique personalities and ways they want to bring that to life in the professional world. But I laid awake in bed thinking, 10 years from now, what jobs will even exist for them in that space? So marketing and graphic design, that is a constant evolutionary shift with AI. And then engineering and manufacturing and all of that, you've got this robotic push that's happening. And so we're getting a little bit into the creativity idea that the changes are constantly occurring inside of us and outside of us. And so we can't ever stay the same. It doesn't work. Personally or professionally, we have to constantly be exploring and expanding.
Yeah. So I want to shift. I generally start with a question, an opening question, but I want to use your statement actually instead. I want to use help me think through this about creativity, and I want to use help me think through this about, because this podcast is really, it's called The Unspoken Edge because of unspoken dynamics. I mean, that's what is so fascinating to me is, and honestly, what you're talking about is bringing some of the unspoken onto the table so we can wrestle with it and we can,
Yeah.
work with it. And so I want to do a little pivot and say, let's use that. Help me think through creativity. Help me think through creativity in this world that is ever changing
Mhm.
with AI, with tech, I mean, with ourselves, our own selves, the nature, we're less people, the population is shrinking. I mean, it's just there's so much. So are you up for that? Can we apply
Yeah.
your
Let's
your
go for
statement
it.
to these two
Let's see where
things?
this goes. It'll be fun.
Okay. Okay. Oh, help me think through creativity in a new way. What haven't I thought about?
So we'll start with creativity, but then I'm going to back us up long before that.
Okay.
So creativity is this term that, everybody obviously knows and hears on a regular basis. And there's a couple ways that it shows up regularly. So there's the obvious, a product of creativity. So arts and crafts. I'm going to go create artwork or poetry
Yeah.
or something tangible. So that's one element of creativity. And the I won't say problem, but the awareness that comes when we think about creativity in that sense is people will either say, I either am creative or I'm not creative. So I'm not good with a paintbrush. I'm not creative. I don't know how to put words together to come up with some beautiful, linguistic piece. I'm not creative. So I like to set aside that component of creativity. And I like to think more about it simply being us having the ability to think about things in a new and different way. And so you see that a lot of
Mm.
times coming up in the workplace when someone will say, let's think outside the box. We have this problem we need to solve. Guys, let's get creative with our solutions. So that's another way that we see it come to life a lot. What I like to do when I'm helping people think through creativity is I like to back it up even further. Because I think the starting point for really allowing for creativity is courage. It is not the end result of creativity, it's the permission to even begin. So you mentioned earlier, as we were kind of chatting, that you're out there doing things and bringing things to life, and you don't exactly know where it will go. And that's okay. But man, that's a really courageous thing to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go try something new and different. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to work. I really don't know what this is going to look like in 6 months, in a year, but I'm still going to do it. The ability to do that that's a creative act. There's trust in yourself. There's courage that sits behind it. And then if you think about the workplace, so you look at that phrase of let's think outside the box, so often people don't do that because they're going to throw out some wild idea to their boss or their coworkers, and people are going to say things like, I mean, we've tried that before. Or, that we're a publicly traded company. That's pretty risky. Shareholders may not get behind it. I don't think we can do that idea. And so you immediately make people wrong, and the courage to think in a creative way starts to dissipate. So I'm going to go back even further and say, I think that part of the root of all of this is this really human desire for conformity, to look, think, act, behave, exist in a specific way that is how you're supposed to be. And that is where it first limits us. And that's what impacts our courage. And that's what creates a roadblock to us being able to think about things in a new and different way, which, as I said, is my own personal definition of creativity. So what do you think, Rachel? I'd love to know your reaction.
Wow. I almost started crying when you said that before creativity, there requires courage. And I love that you're just first putting a spotlight on creativity. Like, let's just define and talk about what creativity is. My relationship with creativity really took a turn in third grade. Third grade. I was tested for the gifted program, and somehow in my third grade mind, I thought that I failed the gifted program because I failed the creativity section of whatever the test was. Third grade. So I went from third grade till like almost 40. I'm not creative, which is like creativity, like the opposite of creativity being conformity is really resonates for me. Because what was happening was I was third grade and I was the oldest. I was a people pleaser. I wanted to get it right. Just tell me how it is and let me get it right, which is really not me because I am outside the box. But I was forcing myself in. And I can actually see from my late 30s to now, it is my courage has gotten bigger and bigger and bolder and bolder. That is so meaningful to put it that way. That
Okay,
clarity is super meaningful.
well, I'll give you some insight too of why. So your experience of picking out third grade and now, saying, late 30s, 40s, feeling like I could kind of embrace it again. So you're not unique in that. I mean, you're
Mm.
very unique, Rachel, but in that experience, so this is
Mm.
part of the reason why I mentioned earlier that I tend to speak more to women's audiences because there's a component of this message that really resonates for women. And that is
Mm.
because there is a lot of research that talks about the shifts that occur in a young girl's brain beginning at the age of 8. So third grade, you're 8, 9 years old. So you're right in alignment with
Right.
this. And a lot of times it shows up as a decrease in self-rated confidence, which kind of ties into that courage element. And it's not necessarily other people's view of you and your confidence. It's your self-rated confidence. So it starts to decrease right around the age of 8. And then at the age of 14, it is significantly lower than a boy's self-rated confidence. I mean, there's a dramatic difference between the two. And I can send you some articles on this if you want to share them or cite them. in your show notes. But this companion to that is that for women, our self-rated confidence doesn't equal that of our male counterparts until we're in our 40s. So there is this natural dip that happens starting at age 8. It kind of bottoms out around 14, and it doesn't come back until we're in our 40s. And so what you just experienced, this idea of starting to question yourself and wonder, it is a totally normal part of neurological development. And it allows our brains to start processing the world around us, which is wonderful and beautiful and important. But it sometimes means that outside world gets louder than that inside voice where creativity just naturally thrives. So I
Yeah.
think it's part of why I think this message is so important for people. It's less about giving them the ability to think creatively, and it's more about going back to acknowledging that we have put ourselves and others have put us into this space where we prioritize conformity and sameness as a huge part of our identity. And that stops us from having the courage to even be creative.
Yeah. Oh, holy Toledo. Okay, when you had said there's like creativity, when we think of creativity, a lot of times we think of outcomes. We think of products. We think of a
Mhm.
painting. We think of, a piece of music, or we think of a book, or we think of, which was a shift that happened for me too, of like, okay, it's not, creativity isn't an outcome. It's a process. It's a opening of yourself. I mean, to me, creativity is authenticity. It's showing up as yourself. It's whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's like, I really I think a lot about authenticity and integrity. And to me, those things together, like, naturally creativity exists when those two things are, you're leaning into those two things. So, but I'm fascinated by this arc of, like, and what that creates for us when we already have this deficit. I mean, I guess I'm saying for women, right? Of this deficit. Well, and is that fair to even say if it's a deficit? Like, I'm already putting it in negative terms, but this questioning of where we fit in the
Yeah.
world. And it also makes me wonder, like, now, like, in this world, like, what was happening for our mothers or our grandmothers, or, yeah, like you mentioned, your daughters. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she is so different than me. And sometimes I wonder if that's part of it. She has the courage to be herself in a way that I never, because of what I was conditioned to center in my life, was not myself, right? How's that
I
landing for you?
Well, I mean, I think those are all the right questions to be asking, and I do think generationally there's a lot of differences that are at play. So I think my both of my grandmothers went to college, which was kind of
Mm.
unheard of to have both sides going to college. One started a family very young. The other didn't start having children until she got married late. She had children late. She kind of did all of the non-traditional things in the beginning. But then when she did get married and have children, then she went very much the traditional course. And I do wonder how much of that was a decision she made for herself and how much of it was a decision that was made by the outside world. And then my parents, both entrepreneurs, both starting their own business, both always gave me that encouragement to say anything that you want to do is definitely possible for you. They maybe gave me maybe it was a false sense of confidence. I don't know. I was the student that consistently got B's and C's because I was like, I mean, I know I'll pass. Like I'll be fine. And maybe it'll be a C.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. I'm smart enough to figure this out. So maybe there might have been a little healthy dose of humbleness that if I would have, studied for tests, I could have actually gotten an A or something like that. But that was the environment I grew up in. But then also I look at my girls and my 11-year-old, she turns 11 in just a few days. She is this little crocheting wizard and she crochets and sews and nobody else at school is doing it. It's just her. She's found this
Yeah.
thing that she loves and she could care less what anybody else thinks about it. And then I
Yeah.
have my 9-year-old who spends so much time gauging everyone else's emotions. She's highly empathetic. And is this going to bother this person? And how are they going to respond to that? And are they sad? And are they worried? And so I don't know if this is a nature versus nurture thing or a generational thing or what the right levers are to pull. But I do think it starts with awareness. So I think acknowledging that for women, there is this curve that we go on and that there are certain things that we can just simply be aware of it. And maybe that in and of itself gives us some courage to say, this isn't necessarily something that's wrong with me. This is just a normal part of human development. And I get to choose my own interaction with it. I don't know if I really answered what you were bringing up
Absolutely.
earlier, but that's where my mind went with it.
I love what you're saying. That choice, the agency, I think is a key. The awareness and the agency are really key pieces. But as you're describing your daughters, I think that so something I use human design in a lot of my
Mhm.
coaching, and we are different. I mean, we're not all the same. We have different just as you were describing your daughters, I imagine one of them probably has a fixed, not a fixed, but a defined identity. And the other one probably has a lot of open centers, seeing in
Yeah.
things from around her and amplifying. And so we have these different, but again, it comes back to awareness and choice. I grew up and I had a lot of open centers. And so I was pulling in so much. Well, then that's interesting. You talked about your grandmothers. Neither one of my well, neither of them actually went to college. One of my grandmas did go to like a certificate program to become a teacher, but she became a teacher when she was like a year older than the kids that she was teaching. It's like a one room schoolhouse or whatever. But I think the naturally how we come into this world and how open we are versus how defined parts of ourselves are, it is the like being aware of how we're moving through. I guess that's what I think about for my kids is how do I help them just be aware of their natural energy and how do I support their choice in that? And I
Yeah.
think, something that I was so disappointed by and I get sometimes systems like we're just so fixed on systems, right? And there's not a lot speaking of creativity, think it systems can be the antithesis of
Yeah.
creativity. And I think we're seeing that in the political system right now. We saw it in the educational system in COVID. And it's just disappointing because you and me have been in corporate and we know that people are not prepared to be amazing contributors. They're prepared to conform.
They are. Yeah.
That's kind of
Well,
what these systems teach.
I think some of the interesting things about that are this conformity thing. It's not an individual problem to solve. So if you are the only
No.
person out there that says, I am going to make the decision not to conform and I'm going to be okay. I mean, some people thrive in that space, but that is not how you are able to really dramatically impact the masses. You have to find a way to normalize nonconformity. And so I firmly believe that the only way that we get to a place where there is this probably continual push towards conformity is that we start having deep, honest, open conversations. That's where the help me think through this phrase comes from. It's not about seeking the answer
Mhm.
from someone else. It's not about looking for a perfect next step. It's just saying, let's just think. And I'm going to trust what your mind comes up with. And I'm going to tell you that I don't have to agree with the ideas, but I value the fact that you're willing to even suggest anything at all. And it's just the shared awareness that we can actually grow together more than we ever could by ourselves. And maybe there's still some conformity in there, but it's all of us conforming towards this idea of celebrating individuality and authenticity and the integrity, as you said, that comes alongside. Maybe it's a total shift on what conformity even means.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, and I think a lot of just as you were talking about that, I think about how a lot of times when we do want to push against the system, we actually outsource our power. We give away our power, wanting the system to say, oh, you are different, or wanting somebody else to validate our creativity instead of validating our own courage, right? Like you
Yeah.
talked about. It's just so interesting. The thing I was thinking about was our nervous systems. I'm really on this kick right now with nervous systems.
Mhm.
And the reality is, I think conformity tends to happen when our nervous systems can't handle. Courage can't happen when you're dysregulated. Courage can't happen when you're in fight, flight, freeze. That's just not, it's,
I fully agree with that.
that's not how it works.
I think that's very true, and I think that it only becomes more amplified when someone thinks that there is a very specific way to act, be, show up, believe, look, all of the
Yeah.
things. That's the conformity piece. So as we're there's that cycle. There's a risk of that where we're constantly trying to quote unquote fit in, and yet we can't because it's not who we are. And it puts us back into this space of deregulation and questioning and worrying and anxiousness. And so we try to solve it by getting back in line again. And yet getting back in line doesn't solve it because that's that's not who we are as individuals. And so I absolutely think that there's a cycle that's happening there. That'd be an interesting thing to really dig into and kind of tease apart more. But you're right. There's almost this intersection where the path to stopping that cycle is courage. And also you have to be willing to get past the cycle to embrace courage. And I do think it goes back to the idea that none of that can happen by ourselves. We really have to have other people on this path with us that are not there trying to give us the answers or telling us the steps, but to be able just to say, I actually don't have the answer, but let's just think about it. I want to help you think through all of it. And maybe we'll find the first next step, not the outcome, but the first next step that you can take to start bringing that creativity into your life.
Yeah, I love that. And then I just will add, I want to use that help me think through this inside of myself too, right? Because I have these parts inside of me that sometimes get super activated. So if I could use help me think through this to a part of me, like that's maybe angry or activated, I don't know, that feels like, I'm not getting my fair share or whatever. And having that sort of like having that in my back pocket, even for internally, I think is beautiful. Okay, we may have to deep dive into some other parts of this because it's so fascinating. But Mary, how can people find you? So if they're like, I have got to bring Mary in, I need to just, how is it best for people to connect with you?
So, from a social media standpoint, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's where I spend the vast majority of my time. I dabble on Instagram, but it's a whole other platform that feels like a whole other world. So, I would suggest LinkedIn. My website is marymessner.com. I've got contact information on the website. So, those two sources, LinkedIn, I try to share a lot of this type of content and thought out there on that platform. And then my website shares information about my keynotes and kind of the engagements that I offer. So both are great spots to check out. And my TEDx. Go
Is
watch
there
the
anything?
TEDx.
And of course, yes, I will link your TEDx. Of course we will. Is there anything that you feel like we've missed that I loved ending with that just next step. But is there anything that you want to add just before we wrap this up?
I really think that a huge part of this is just giving people permission to play and standing on their own circle in their own space and embracing what that means for them and just experiment with it. And someone else will see. And that other person that sees becomes your first follower. And that's all it takes is a first follower to say, you know what, this idea of pushing past conformity and embracing courage, man, it's creating some really interesting ideas for you. Maybe it's time for me to get on board. And that's how it all starts. And I don't want to go all philosophical and say it's the beginning of a movement. It could be, but just for us as individuals, I think that's where we start. Go play.
Yeah, go play. Thank you so much, Mary. Our guests bring such clarity and depth. If you want to explore more of their work, you'll find links in the show notes. And thank you, listener, for joining me on the Unspoken Edge, the place where we name what's missing so you can lead from what matters. If something resonated with you today, share this episode with a friend or a colleague. Leave a review or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you're navigating unseen tensions in your leadership or culture, let's connect. You'll find me at mosaiccollaborative.com because legacy isn't a final chapter. It's what you live into, one conversation at a time.